Betty, tell me, today is March the
18.
8th? No, it's not that for you.
When
Yeah, it
you
is
said-
March the 18th, 2014. This is Julie. I'm visiting Aunt Betty at, what's the name of your place?
Asbury Methodist
Asbury
Village.
Methodist Village. And we've had a good time. I've been here for 2 nights, and you've shared lots of stories, so we just want to go over some of them. First, tell them the story about Marguerite, who Marguerite was, and during the Depression.
Well, those of you who have visited my house and maybe Susie's, we have a picture of our family, our mother and father and grandmother, when Susan is probably about 12 and I'm about 9. Mm-hmm. And there's this picture of us, and in it is our Aunt Marguerite and her 2 children, as well as the people who lived at Birmingham. And they lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And during the Depression, they wrote to our Uncle Buddy, who's the tall, gray-haired man in the picture, and she said, "We're starving." They lived out in Oklahoma, and I guess he didn't have a job. I'm sure he didn't have a job. So Uncle Buddy wrote back, and he said, I can't send you any money, but I can feed you if you'll come to Birmingham. So she got on the train with her 2 little children, who were about 5 and 18 months, and came to Birmingham. And that is the picture that they had taken while she was there. And I told Julie that I remember my mother and Aunt Sarah talking about all Toddy ate the whole year, 9 months they were there, was white bread with butter and sugar on it.
And they got you out of school for the picture.
Oh, and I remember my Aunt Ruth, who lived across the street from the school, getting me out of school and taking me down to the studio to have the picture taken.
Now tell me about when your grandmother Sudie used to keep you and what she said when they pulled it.
Well, Grandmother Sudie had a woman who helped her and cooked for her every day, and her name was Maddie. And so she was always there, and she probably was Grandmother's best friend. Well, when I was little, probably 3, 4, 5, although we didn't have kindergarten in those days, I could have been six, my mother started substituting teaching. And so my daddy, unannounced, would take me over to my grandmother's house to be kept for the day, to be babysat for. And Maddie told me, and years later when I was grown and my grandmother died, she said my grandmother used to say, my daddy would drive up out front and she would say, "Oh, Maddie, we're in for it today. Here she comes. Here she comes." So I guess I was a handful.
Now, do you have anything that you think of right away? I can think of more, but what comes to your mind about stories that we've talked about?
Oh, I like better for you to ask me. I can't think.
Tell them about when Susan, my mother, was on the horse.
Well, when she was in elementary school, I think probably about 8th grade, one of her friends lived out in the country and had a horse, and she came to see us one day and brought a horse. So Susan decided she would get on the horse, and she got on the horse, and it took off at a dead run on concrete street up the hill, and I can still see her hair flying and her screaming. And she finally fell off about a block or 2 up the hill, and I had followed the horse, and I saw it, and then I saw her fall off, and she was unconscious, and I ran home to tell my mother, and I said, "Susan's fallen off the horse," and Mother had on her usual stockings with all the holes in them, and her old work dress that she wore, and her little high-heel shoes that she worked in, and she said, "Oh, I got to change my clothes, I got to change my clothes." Well, she finally got her clothes changed, and about that time the ambulance came, and Susan and Mother went up to where Susan was put in the ambulance, and so she said to the so Susan, by this time Susan's sitting up and she's waving to everybody as they drove down the street. And so my mother said before they got up to Oxbow, she said, "I'm not taking any child to the hospital in an ambulance that's sitting up waving out. Take me back home." And so they took her back home, and they went to their doctor the next day, and he ran x-rays, and Susan had a, what did I tell you she had?
Concussion?
No, she didn't. They didn't call it that then.
Cracked skull.
Yeah, they called it something. Skull fracture.
Fracture, yeah.
Yeah, and so she had a skull fracture, so she had to stay in bed and take it easy for quite a while.
That's so cute.
And one story I didn't tell Julie that my mother used to tell. Susan was 3 years older than I was. And my mother said that when she brought me home from the hospital, Susan was 3 and she was there and she was so bossy, and she'd say to everybody, "That's my baby sister. That's my baby sister. You can't touch her. That's my baby sister."
That's cute. Now tell us about when y'all, this is years later, but when you moved into your accommodations in France, when you lived in the hospital.
No, the hospital wasn't in France. We lived that was in Leavenworth, Kansas.
Oh, okay. Well, tell about that.
No, it wasn't Leavenworth, Kansas. It's Fort Carson,
Colorado. Okay, definitely.
Well, we moved to Colorado, and they offered us not.
You had 4 children.
I had 4 children at that time, and they offered us as living accommodations on the post, a wing of a hospital, and this was a hospital they had taken over after the Second World War. And so it was a half of a football field from our front door to our back door. And we had, I don't know, 6 or 7 bathrooms and 8 bedrooms, I think. Little bitty bedrooms. They had been single rooms when it was a hospital. And in the living room, we had what had been the great big ward. And so one corner of it was the living room, one corner of it was the family room, one corner of it was the dining room, and we had a ping pong table in the fourth quarter. And I guess that was all you wanted to know.
About the laundry and the cart.
Oh, well, during the time we were there, we could walk to the hospital. The hospital was still under the same quarters. I mean, it was in the same location. It just they didn't take up all the space, and they had a lot of people living there. And so I would walk down the hall, and one time I found an electric polisher, floor polisher out in the hall, and so I just took it home, and I had that for the rest of the time I was there. And then I also had a 3-level hospital cart where you put your medicines and things on, and I used that to put the laundry on, and I'd get the laundry and get it all folded, and then I'd go down the cart of the hospital ward and put it in each person's room.
What about the showers?
And they each had a bathroom in their rooms. Sandy had a bathroom, Sherry had a bathroom, Mary Beth had a bathroom, Andrew had a bathroom. And I wouldn't let them use the showers. We had one central bathroom, or maybe 2 that we all used, but I wouldn't let them use the showers. They could use the sink and the toilet, and then I used the shower as a closet because we didn't have any closets. There wasn't a closet in this whole great big area, and so they couldn't use that as a shower. They had to go down the hall to take their shower.
Now tell me the story again that I remember about when y'all were all getting on the airplane to go overseas or come home, and you couldn't sit together. And you asked the man to move.
Oh, well, when we were coming home from Okinawa, and Sandy and Sherry by that time were about 6 and 7, and Andrew was an infant. He had been born in September, and we came home in December. And in those days, they loaded the airplane up with people with children first. So the first time we got on the airplane out in Chicago, we got on first, and it was wintertime. December, we got all the coats taken off, everything. We got all settled, and then they announced that the plane couldn't take off. We had to change planes. Well, by the time we got all of our kids together, and the 3 children and everything covered up and wrapped up, and the baby wrapped up, got to the other airplane, a lot of the seats had been taken, and they'd all were businessmen who were in one seat, and there were 2-seat planes in those days, 2 on each side. And so I went, and there was no place for me to have 2 seats together. So I sat Sandy down next to this elegant-looking gentleman, and I said to her, "Now, Sandy," I didn't say if, I said, "when you throw up, try not to throw up on the man." I said, "Here's a bag," because she was notoriously motion sick. And he said, "Oh, madam, you may have my seat." And he jumped up and moved on back.
Oh, that's cute. All right, tell me a Christmas memory.
Well, those go way back to when I was a child, and we had a Christmas tree in Alabama, and we had a fireplace, and my mother insisted on having a fire even if it was 65 degrees, and they went to the lot and got the Christmas tree, but it just had 2 boards that were at square angles to each other that you putting it in a bucket with water or anything, so they must have been very dry. And so there it was right next to the fireplace. And why we didn't all burn down, I don't know. And I don't told Julie, my mother spent $5 on each of us. She told me one time that she allowed herself $5 for each child at Christmas time. And we had good Christmases. Oh, and everybody in my mother's family came to our house for breakfast. And in the latter years, my dad would cook breakfast, but we'd have a big breakfast, and then we'd have the big family Christmas tree, and they had a 25-cent limit, I think, on what they could pay for any of their presents, and everybody got a present, and that was Uncle Hoffy and my grandmother Todd, and Ruth Todd, and Hoffy Todd, and Mary Frances, and Joe Travis, and then all the children. So we had a big crowd. And we did that up until Aunt Susan was the first one to have any children, and she got married, and when she got married, and then she had, I think maybe she came first, but by the time she had the third child, she said, "Mama, I can't get my children out that on Christmas morning." And so at that time, they all, of course, all the rest of us, Polly and I were gone. They started going over to the Trusses, over to Susan's in the Orange house for Christmas morning, watch the Santa Claus.
Do you have any particular memories of going to Sunday school or church or anything that happened at Dawson when you were little, or just?
I have a very good memory, but I'm not going to tell it to this.
Are you sure?
Yes, it's risque. I'm not going to repeat that one.
You can tell me later.
I'll tell Julie later. But yes, I remember, and I loved church and Sunday school, and I went to church and Sunday school, and then I went to BTU and church at night. And my mother and daddy didn't go at church on Sunday night. She said she needed to rest, and she just didn't go. And I loved it, and so I went, and I know more about, even though I've been a Presbyterian for 60 years now, I still know more about the Baptist church because of all that Sunday school and BTU training.
Tell them about Sunday afternoons and Sunday mornings getting dressed and Ganga being so hot. I can identify with that, and then the Sunday afternoon visiting. Tell them all about that.
I don't remember what Sunday afternoon and what was
Just
it?
that you went and visited people.
Oh, well, Sunday mornings, one of the things I can remember must have been during the summer and how hot it was. You know, we had no air conditioning. We didn't even have a fan. And I can remember Ganga trying to get dressed and perspiring, and she'd wait and put on the top of her dress the last thing she did. And we quite often walked. We were only about 6 blocks from church, and we quite often walked. And on Sunday afternoon, my mother didn't drive, and in those days, if you young children can believe it, it was a treat to get in the car and go somewhere. So every Sunday afternoon, my daddy would pile us in the car, and mother, and we'd go for a long drive. I don't think when he was driving we went to see cousins and aunts, but later we did when either Polly or Susan or I were driving. But my daddy would drive, and we'd have a nice drive in the country, and then we'd come back to Waits, which was a famous ice cream parlor in Birmingham over on the south side. And I'd always have an orange sherbet.
Okay, anything else you can think of that you would want them to remember that would just kind of describe either your life when they were children and what it was like, just a memory from their childhood, your children's childhood, or yours?
Well, I think Sandy and Sherry pretty much remember Ganga. I don't think Andrew probably would, but they remember Ganga and how much fun she was and made fun for them. And Julie remembers when we would all come to see them, and she and Sandy and Sherry would try to get lost out in Edgewood and walk around, and so we had some good times.
Mm-hmm.
My memory's not very good.
Oh, I think your memory's great. I thought of one more thing to ask you. Well, I'm going to say goodbye, but if I think about it, we'll turn it back on, or if you think of something else.
Okay.
Didn't we have a good time?
Yeah, we've had a wonderful